Welcome back to Revenge Plus, where revenge isn't just sweet, it's unforgettable. Let's dive into today's unforgettable story. I remember the day they let me go like it was yesterday. It felt like a cruel joke, one that they were all in on. There I was, sitting in that cold, sterile conference room, trying to process the words that were being thrown at me. We're going in a different direction. We appreciate your contributions, but this just isn't working out. They didn't even have the decency to pretend that it wasn't personal. The words stung, but it wasn't just the dismissal that left me shaking. It was the smirks on their faces as they delivered the news. It was like they were waiting for me to fall apart, to beg, to plead for a chance. But instead I sat there numb, and for the first time in my life I did the unthinkable. I smiled. It wasn't the kind of smile you'd expect after being fired. It wasn't a smile of relief or even sadness. It was the smile of someone who had just discovered the truth. The truth about their worth, the truth about the people around them. I knew this wasn't the end. No, this was just the beginning of something far more interesting. Wait, what do you mean by that? You might be asking. Well, you see, while they thought they had broken me, they had done something far more dangerous. They had underestimated me. And that mistake, well, it would haunt them forever. But that's not even the most shocking part. What's even more unbelievable is what happened next. I didn't just walk out of that office with my head held high. I walked out knowing that I was about to turn my entire life around. And the people who thought they had defeated me, they had no idea that their biggest regret was about to come knocking at their door. Imagine this, just a few months later I was sitting across from them, but this time it was at the negotiation table. They were the ones asking for help. They were the ones begging me to come back. But this time I didn't smile out of pity, I smiled because I had won. The tables had turned and I was now the one holding the cards. But how did I get from that office to where I am today? How did I go from being the one tossed aside to becoming the one they needed? Well, it all starts with one simple truth. The best way to get even is to succeed beyond their wildest dreams. And trust me, that's exactly what I did. Now I know what you're thinking, this sounds like a movie, right? Well, let me tell you, life is stranger than fiction. And when you play your cards right, it's not just about revenge. It's about proving to yourself that you are capable of so much more than anyone ever thought. So, how did I do it? Stick around because what comes next will blow your mind. Have you ever been underestimated? Have you ever been told you weren't good enough, only to show the world exactly what you're made of? Because let me tell you, the moment you stop trying to prove others wrong and start proving yourself right, that's when the magic happens. But that's just the first chapter of this story. Stick with me. I promise you won't want to miss the rest. As I walked out of that office, I couldn't help but think about the people who had orchestrated this whole thing. They thought they had succeeded in pushing me out, in making me feel small. But little did they know this was far from the end. This was the beginning of their downfall. Let's talk about them for a moment, the so-called leaders who decided my fate. The ones who had never once paused to consider the impact of their decisions. It was as if they thought I was just another cog in the machine, someone easily replaceable. But they couldn't have been more wrong. And as the days went by, I began to see the true nature of these people, the ones who had been pulling the strings all along. The first person I want to highlight is Victoria. She was the one who'd always worn a smile so fake it made you wonder if she was ever truly happy. She was the one who sat in on meetings, her voice dripping with condescension, as if her every word was gospel. When I first started at the company, she seemed like a mentor. She offered advice, made promises, even gave me the impression that she had my best interests at heart. But that was just a facade, wasn't it? I started to notice the little things. The way she would throw people under the bus when it suited her. The way she would smile sweetly at you one moment, then turn around and gossip about you to anyone who would listen. The way she would always manage to get credit for work that wasn't hers, while the rest of us were left to do the grunt work. It wasn't long before I realized that this wasn't about teamwork, it was about manipulation. And I was just another pawn in her game. Then there was Adam. Oh, Adam, the classic office narcissist. He walked around with an air of arrogance that made your skin crawl. He thought he was untouchable, the golden boy who could do no wrong. He had a way of charming everyone in the room, making them believe that he was the smartest, the most capable person in the entire building. But behind that smile was a mind consumed with self-interest. Adam didn't care about the team. Adam cared about Adam. He was the one who'd play favorites, who'd take credit for successes and deflect blame when things went wrong. He was the type who would smile and nod at the big meetings, but when it came down to actually working, He was always too busy or too important to help. And let's not even talk about how he treated people below him. His arrogance was a toxic presence, one that made it nearly impossible for anyone to thrive without stepping on others. And then there was Richard. He was the one who had been my direct manager. Richard, the man who had always seemed so friendly, so kind. But the truth is, he was a coward. He lacked the backbone to make a decision on his own, always leaning on others to do his work for him, but taking all the credit when it paid off. Richard had a knack for telling you exactly what you wanted to hear, but when it came to standing up for what was right, he was always silent. He was the type of person who would throw you under the bus the moment it suited his interests. All three of them, Victoria, Adam, and Richard, had one thing in common. They were willing to do whatever it took to climb the corporate ladder, even if it meant stepping on anyone who got in their way. And that's exactly what they did to me. They didn't see the value in me, the skills I brought to the table, the dedication I had shown. All they saw was a threat, someone who might one day take the spotlight from them. So they made their move, pushing me out in the most calculated and heartless way possible. What they didn't know, though, was that their cruelty was the spark that ignited something in me. They thought they had broken me, that they had silenced me. But what they didn't realize is that I had been planning my comeback long before they even knew what hit them. I had been preparing for this moment, and I was ready to turn the tables in the most spectacular way. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about showing them, and everyone else who had ever doubted me, that I was capable of so much more than they could ever imagine. And that's exactly what I was going to do. But how was I going to do it? How would I go from being the person they discarded to the one they begged for a chance? It's simple. I would use their mistakes against them. I would turn their ignorance into my opportunity. And every step of the way, I would outsmart them. I had a plan, and it was already set into motion. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about taking control of my life again. And as the days turned into weeks, I could see the cracks in their armor. The perfect illusion they had built was starting to crumble. But what happened next? How did I make my move? How did I turn the tables and make them pay for their actions? Keep watching, because the best part is yet to come. By the time I had left the office, the weight of what had just happened started to settle in. It was more than just losing a job. It was a loss of trust, of respect, of all the things I thought I had built over the years. But the more I reflected on it, the clearer it became. This was an opportunity. Not just for revenge, but for something bigger, something far more fulfilling. And I had been planning for this moment for longer than anyone could ever imagine. I didn't just sit around and wallow in self-pity. No, I took action. I took the time to reassess everything. Every project I had worked on, every success I had achieved, and most importantly, every betrayal I had endured. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I had always been underestimated. People had always assumed I was just a quiet, diligent worker. But that was the thing, they never saw the real me. They never saw the one who was always watching, learning, and calculating. They didn't realize how far ahead I was already planning. They didn't understand that I was never going to be their pawn. So I began to lay out my plan. The first step was simple. I would not just find another job, I would create my own empire. I had the experience, I had the network, and most importantly, I had the knowledge of exactly what was missing in the industry. The more I looked at the market, the clearer it became. There was a gap, a hole that no one had bothered to fill, and I was in the perfect position to exploit it. But I didn't act on impulse. No, I took the time to build a strategy. Every move I made, every decision I took was calculated. And when the time came, I would strike with precision. I knew that going into business on my own wasn't going to be easy, but nothing worth having ever is. I was prepared for the long haul. The first thing I did was put together a business plan. It wasn't just a vague idea of what I wanted to do, it was a detailed blueprint of the future I wanted to create. I spent hours, days even, refining it. I pulled in data, researched trends, and reached out to mentors who had been where I was. I wasn't just building a business, I was building a brand, one that could rival the very company that had once dismissed me. As I worked on this plan, something else was happening behind the scenes. I had an idea, a secret weapon, something that would not only ensure my success, but would also deliver the final blow to the people who had underestimated me. The very people who had pushed me out would be the ones who came crawling back, begging for my help. I started leveraging the connections I had made over the years. I reached out to former colleagues, partners, and clients. It wasn't about revenge, it was about building something new, something better. As I spoke to these people, I could feel the excitement building. They were tired of the same old companies, the same old products, the same old failures. They were ready for something different, and I was ready to give it to them. While I was laying the groundwork for my new venture, I also kept an eye on the company that had let me go. I knew that they wouldn't sit still for long. The mistakes they had made in their management were going to catch up with them eventually. I was no longer in the game, but I knew they would be looking for someone with the expertise to fix their mess. But I wasn't going to be their savior. No, I had bigger plans than that. I would make them realize just how badly they had messed up by not recognizing my potential. They had thrown me out like I was nothing. But now they were about to see what that decision really cost them. Months passed and my business started to take off. Slowly at first, but soon enough the momentum built. I wasn't just making money, I was building a name. A reputation. People started recognizing my brand, started seeking out my expertise. And just as I had planned, the company that had once discarded me was faltering. They had no idea how to navigate the mess they had created. Their stock was tanking, their employees were dissatisfied, and their clients were leaving in droves. One morning, I received a call. It was from Victoria. She was speaking carefully, her voice shaky, as though she were walking on eggshells. "Hi, I hope you're doing well," she said, her words laced with an awkwardness that I could practically hear over the phone. "I wanted to check in and see if you'd be open to a discussion." I could barely contain my smile. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for. I played it cool, of course. I kept my voice calm, almost indifferent. "What's this about?" I asked, as if I had no idea what was coming. If that revenge hit just right, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more epic comebacks and justice-served stories. Drop a comment below. I'd love to know what you would have done in their place. She hesitated. "We've been facing some challenges recently," she said, the words hanging in the air like a heavy weight. "And well, we were hoping you might be willing to help us. There's a project we've been struggling with, and we think you're the only one who can save it. You're the expert we need." I took a deep breath. It was exactly what I had been waiting for. The person who had once treated me like I was dispensable was now begging for my expertise. I wasn't about to let this moment slip away. "Well," I said, letting the silence stretch between us, "I'm flattered you reached out. But I think I'll have to pass." Victoria's voice faltered. "What do you mean, we really need you? You're the only one who can fix this." I could hear the desperation in her voice, and it was music to my ears. I had waited for this. I had played my cards perfectly, and now the tables had turned. "I'm sorry, Victoria, but I'm a bit busy with my own ventures right now. I'm sure you'll manage somehow." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could almost see her trying to come up with a response, but nothing she said could change the truth. I had succeeded. And now she and the others would have to face the consequences of their actions. I hung up the phone and leaned back in my chair, feeling a sense of satisfaction that I had never known before. It wasn't about the money or the power or the position I had now. It was about proving them wrong. It was about showing them that the one they thought was disposable had come back to show them who was really in control. But as I looked at my growing business, at the people who believed in me, and the success that was unfolding, I couldn't help but wonder. How far could I take this? How much further would the story go? Would they keep coming to me for help, or would they finally realize that they had created their own downfall? What was next? Because one thing was for sure. This was only the beginning. A few weeks passed, and I continued to focus on growing my business. The momentum was undeniable. Every client I gained, every new partnership I forged, only served to strengthen my resolve. I knew I had made the right choice in walking away from the job that had once consumed my life. And as I watched the company that had once dismissed me crumble under the weight of its own incompetence, I felt a deep sense of vindication. But there was more to be done. My plan wasn't just to build a successful company, it was to make sure they understood the price of underestimating me. Then came the day I had been anticipating, the day I would finally make my move. It wasn't enough for me to just move on and be successful. I needed them to feel the sting of their decision. And I wasn't going to make it easy for them. Victoria, Adam, and Richard, they were all still in their positions, still clinging to the false sense of superiority they had built. But the cracks were deepening. Clients were complaining, internal conflicts were rising, and employees were starting to speak out. It wasn't long before I found out that they were on the verge of losing a major account, a client I had worked with extensively during my time there. At that moment, I knew what I had to do. I wasn't just going to sit by and watch them fail. I was going to give them a taste of their own medicine. I had something they desperately needed, something they couldn't ignore. The information, the expertise, the connections, everything I had gained during my time there was now in my hands. I had the power to either help them or watch them sink, and I was going to make them beg for my help. But I didn't give them the satisfaction of a simple call. No, I wasn't going to let them off that easily. I arranged a meeting with the client that they were about to lose, a client that was now in talks with my business. The deal was almost sealed, and I knew that if I could pull this off, it would be the final blow. They would be left to wonder how they had let someone like me slip through their fingers. The day of the meeting, I could feel the tension in the air. I was in the conference room, sitting across from the same client I had worked with before. The client's eyes widened when they saw me. It was clear that they had expected to meet someone else, someone from the company I used to work for. But there I was, on the other side of the table, a stark reminder of the opportunity they had missed. "I didn't expect to see you here," the client said, trying to mask the surprise in their voice. I smiled. "Well, business is all about timing, and I think we both know that timing is everything." We spent the next hour discussing the project, the plans, and the future of our collaboration. As the meeting came to an end, the client looked at me with a mixture of admiration and regret. "I can see that you've built something incredible here, and honestly, we're excited about the potential of working together." I nodded. "I'm glad to hear that, and just to be clear, I'm here because I believe in this project. I believe in what we can achieve together, but I think it's time for you to make the right decision." The client paused, then leaned forward, lowering their voice. "We were on the verge of signing with your old company, but now, I'm not so sure." "Take your time," I said, my voice smooth, calm. "But remember, the right choice is about more than just who you know. It's about who can actually deliver, and I can." With that, the deal was all but done. The client signed with my company, and just like that, I had secured a major victory. But it wasn't just about the money or the project, it was about making them realize how wrong they had been. But I wasn't done yet. The real kicker came a few days later. Victoria called me again. She was desperate. She had heard that I had secured the client, and her voice was shaky when she asked if I would be willing to discuss a potential partnership. She spoke in vague terms, trying to sound casual, but I could tell she was scrambling. This time I didn't pick up the phone right away. I let it ring. I let the tension build. When I finally answered, I kept my tone cold and professional, but there was no mistaking the satisfaction in my voice. "Victoria," I said, "it's been a while. I see things are not going as well as planned." She immediately tried to cover her tracks. "I just wanted to see if we could work something out. The company is facing some challenges, and we think there might be a way for us to." "I'm going to stop you right there," I interrupted. "I don't think there's much you can do for me now. You see, I've moved on. I'm doing just fine without your help, and I don't need to go back to a place that didn't value me." There was a long pause on the other end. Then she tried again, this time more carefully. "Please just hear me out. I know we made some mistakes, but we're trying to turn things around. We've got new plans, new leadership." I couldn't help but smile to myself. They were scrambling, trying to salvage whatever shred of dignity they had left. It was pathetic, but I knew it was also their only option. They had no choice but to grovel, to beg, and I was enjoying every second of it. "You had your chance, Victoria," I said calmly, savoring the moment. "And you blew it. There's nothing you can do to fix that. You're going to have to find someone else to clean up your mess." The line went silent for a moment. I could hear her breathing heavily, trying to come up with something to salvage the conversation. But the damage had been done. The roles had reversed. The tables had turned, and I was the one in control now. I hung up the phone and leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of everything I had worked for. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about taking back my power, proving to myself and to the world that I was capable of so much more than they had ever believed. And as I looked around at the success I had built, at the people who believed in me, I realized that I had accomplished something far greater than I had ever imagined. They had underestimated me, but now they had to live with the consequences. But this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The story was far from over, and I knew that there was so much more to come, so much more to prove. It wasn't long before things started to take a turn I hadn't anticipated. I had done everything right, built my business from the ground up, outsmarted my former employers, and even secured major clients. I had outgrown the people who once thought they could control me. But as I watched my empire grow, I realized that there were still unfinished business matters to handle, matters I hadn't fully expected to come knocking at my door. Victoria's call was only the beginning. It wasn't just a matter of corporate rivalry anymore. No, this time it was personal. The company I had left behind wasn't going to simply fade into the background. They were fighting back, and this time it wasn't with their words or desperation, it was with their lawyers. I was sitting in my office one afternoon when I received an unexpected letter from a law firm. At first, I didn't even recognize the name on the envelope, but as soon as I opened it, I knew exactly who it was from. The company had decided to take legal action against me. They claimed that I had breached a non-compete clause in my contract, a clause I hadn't even thought twice about when I left. I had never imagined that they would come after me like this, especially after everything that had transpired between us. I read the letter again. Their claim was baseless, full of empty threats designed to intimidate. The non-compete agreement they referred to wasn't enforceable in the context of the business I had started. But they didn't care about that. They just wanted to make my life difficult. They knew that I had something they needed, and they were willing to use the legal system to try and force me into a corner. I sat back in my chair and took a deep breath. It wasn't the first time I'd had to face adversity. I had learned how to fight battles before, but this one felt different. It wasn't just about the business anymore. It was about protecting everything I had worked so hard to build. I reached out to my own legal team, one that I had put together after securing my first major contract, and laid out everything that had happened. My lawyer, Mark, was no stranger to corporate warfare. He listened carefully as I explained the situation, his face growing darker with every word I said. "You're right," he said after a long silence. "They don't have a leg to stand on. But that doesn't mean they won't try. This isn't just about the contract. They're trying to drag you down, to disrupt your success because they can't stand seeing you thrive." I nodded. It was exactly what I had expected. But hearing it out loud made me realize that I wasn't dealing with a simple dispute anymore. This was a full-blown attack on everything I had worked for. They were trying to break me, not just legally but emotionally. They were trying to take away my confidence, my sense of accomplishment, and I wasn't going to let that happen. The next few days were a blur. We started preparing a defense, gathering evidence to prove that their case had no merit. I spent hours going over contracts, emails, and every interaction I had with the company. The more I went through it, the more I realized how transparent their motives were. They had nothing. Their threats were just an attempt to wear me down. But here's where it got interesting. Just as we were getting ready to file our response, I received a call from Richard. Yes, Richard, the same manager who had thrown me under the bus all those months ago. His voice was shaky, almost apologetic. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said, his words laced with discomfort, "but I think you should know that this legal thing has become a lot bigger than we originally thought. The company is really desperate to make this work, and they've been pressuring everyone to take sides." I couldn't help but smile. This was exactly what I had been waiting for. It wasn't just about the legal battle anymore. This was about exposing the truth that they had no moral high ground to stand on. "Richard, you've got to understand," I said, my tone calm but firm. "I'm not going to let this company take what I've built. If they want to play dirty, then I'll fight back with everything I've got. They can't win this. They won't win this." He was quiet for a moment before he spoke again, his voice sounding smaller now. "I know, I wanted to warn you. Things are about to get really messy. If you can, try to reach out to Adam or Victoria. I'm sure they'll try to come after you from all sides. It's not just legal, it's everything." The moment he said those words, I knew something important had shifted. Richard, the cowardly manager who had once stood by as I was tossed aside, was now trying to give me a heads up. He wasn't on their side anymore. Maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the only one who had seen through the cracks in their facade. But I wasn't interested in playing their games. I wasn't about to take the bait and let them drag me down into their mess. I had a much bigger game to play, and I was going to play it on my terms. The next week, I received another letter from the law firm. This time, it wasn't a warning. It was a threat of legal action that would cost me millions in damages. They were serious about their pursuit, and the weight of their threats was starting to sink in. But I wasn't afraid. I had already decided I was going to fight. Mark, my lawyer, was ready for battle. He wasn't intimidated by their tactics. He assured me that we had the law on our side and that they couldn't force me into submission just because they were trying to salvage their crumbling empire. It was time for me to take a stand, not just for myself, but for everything I had worked for. I wasn't going to let them tarnish my hard-earned success. This was more than just a legal dispute, it was a fight for my future. The moment I had been waiting for arrived faster than I expected. The company, once brimming with confidence, was now crumbling under the weight of its own mistakes. The first blow came when they lost the major client I had secured, a client they thought they could easily replace. With that, word quickly spread that their leadership was failing. Clients started pulling out, and soon, the once loyal employees began to leave too, fed up with the toxic environment and the lack of direction. Internally, cracks deepened. Victoria, Adam, and Richard, unable to manage the chaos, turned on each other. Investors, once confident in their leadership, began questioning everything. When the financial situation worsened, it was clear they had no way out. The collapse was swift. Their empire, built on arrogance and manipulation, fell apart because they couldn't adapt. They had no one to blame but themselves. They had underestimated me, and now they had to face the consequences. What was once a towering institution was now reduced to nothing more than a hollow shell. The tables had turned, and I had won. As the dust settled and their empire crumbled, I stood firm, watching from the sidelines. But this wasn't about savoring the victory, it was about using this moment to make something greater. My business, built on resilience and strategy, had grown stronger with each passing day, and now it was thriving. But I knew that true success wasn't just measured by profits. It was measured by the difference you make in others' lives. I started offering mentorship to those who had been silenced or overlooked, just as I once had been. I helped others build their own dreams, showing them that no one is too small to succeed. The true power wasn't in revenge, it was in empowerment, in lifting others as you rise. The company that once dismissed me was gone, but the lessons remained. Never let anyone define your worth. Never back down from your potential. And most importantly, always remember that your biggest strength lies in believing in yourself when no one else does. This was the real victory, the one that would resonate far beyond the boardroom.